and welcome back to the channel. My name is Muriel, and in this video I will be doing my September reading wrap-up. In the month of September, I read a total of 4 books, 2 novels and 2 novella-length books. I'm going to start with the novels, and well, hear ye, hear ye. I am pretty confident I have acquired a new fancy favourite, and it is none other than Patrick Rothfuss, the Kingkiller Chronicles. Goddamn! I did not expect that at all. But yes, most of September was dedicated to listening to, or ear reading, if you will, The Name of the Wind and The Wise Man's Fear. And all thanks to one of my dearest friends. So big shout out to her because she's awesome, doubly so for gifting me these beautiful UK paperback editions. I'm not going to go into the details of what this series is about because it's one of the big names in high fantasy literature. As such, most of you probably already know this story, just like Robin Hobb's Farseer and others of course, is principally told as the main character, Kvothe's memoir, and that it heavily features a magical university. Though to be clear, the university, as it is called, it teaches everything a real one would. Magic and related alchemy, etc. is just one of the disciplines you can study there, because Tamarant, that's the world of the Kingkiller Chronicles, its world-building integrates magic with science, to a certain extent. That's actually one world-building element I really enjoyed. The fact this world both has truly magical, mystical, spiritual, creative force, if you will, magic, but also science-adjacent and, I guess science-cooperative magic. A layered or bimodal magic system, if you will. Either way, it gets a yay from me. And honestly, several things get a yay from me here. The world of the Kingkiller Chronicles itself felt vibrant. This is immersive high fantasy in the best possible sense of the word and subgenre. Now, yes, and this is a big plus, the audiobooks for these were absolutely stellar, but I also followed the story with my physical copies at times, and my ears and eyes both agree this is proper fancy literature. The prose felt lovely to both, and had a beautiful sense of rhythm, of cadence, which conceptually links wonderfully back to the fact that the story's protagonist is a passionate musician, amongst other things. I always love these little, I'm going to call them literary synchronicities. You know, just like I always love when a story thematically, emotionally, tonally, or playfully reflects its title. That's like, bookish cookies to me. Speaking of both, I also enjoyed most of Kingkiller's characters, which mega big yay for me. I am aware a lot of people seem to hate him, or just thoroughly dislike this character, just like a lot of people hate Quentin Coldwater, or Julia from The Magicians, or Marianne from Normal People, all characters I personally find somewhat neurodivergent coded to greater or lesser extents. Coincidence? I think not. Then a bit more strangely, I've also seen people argue Kvothe doesn't feel real, or I mean realistic, human psychology-wise, and all that he feels like a Gary Stu, but I respectfully disagree. Kvothe, to me, is just an intellectually and musically gifted young man, with some trauma sprinkled on top. Some read him as being ADHD coded as well, and the series author has ADHD. Now, I don't specifically agree or disagree there. I am technically on that spectrum too, kinda, but I'm more familiar with the autism side of the equation, so make of that what you will. But he certainly reminded me of, well, Quentin Coldwater. A lot, actually. And the found family he acquires at the university outside of Imre reminded me of Quentin's Breakbills 1-2. Okay, with perhaps slightly lower levels of day-to-day dysfunction overall. And whilst sure he's a bit of a twat at times, I guess, he's also just, you know what, immature. He is a teenager. Otherwise, he is very much shown to have more of a good heart than not. And the same goes for his friends. Dana, Fella, Sim, and Ori. The most precious little Fabian in existence, but I'll come back to her shortly. The character relationships, for their part, meet the quality of the series' individual character work. Denna and Kvothe's relationship, for instance, qualifies, for me, as a beautifully executed slow burn platonic friendship to non-platonic love romance I wish SFF had more of. When warranted, of course. The university's professors all had characters well, and I enjoyed seeing Kvothe interact with them, and the various other people he encounters during his progressively revealed life journey, and I also really liked the character Bast, etc., etc. And it's a long, somewhat meandering, yes, story. The plot goes in a lot of different directions, and the world building follows suit. This is something I enjoyed. I've stated so many times now, I am primarily world building and theming driven when I read SFF, which is partly why I am surprised I loved these books so much on first read through, as those two facets didn't feel as immediately apparent to me, but it is definitely there. It's just that those threads of the narrative tapestry, if you will, are more subtly or finely woven in than tends to be the case with other higher-ranking SFF favorites of mine. I finished The Name of the Wind, and I enjoyed the story itself, the very world itself and its characters so much, I had this very contented confidence I would progressively get more of Tamarant's world-building in time. And I did. The Wise Man's Fear gave me deeper lore, and I ate that shit up. I love the magic system, like I already said. I love the layered mythic history you get glimpses of in Book 2, some of which is very obviously, to me, inspired by Western fairy lore, and I approve of that. And the socio-cultural world-building that went into the Edemre specifically. As to theming, well, to me there is a lot to be read in these books about the very nature and purposes of storytelling, both on an individual biographical level and then on a collective historical one. There is also material about trauma, survival, surviving trauma, and, you know, the beauty, warmth, necessity of human or human-adjacent connection. On a subtler tonal level, I loved that the world and story of Kingkiller show kindness and compassion not only exist, but that they are also very valuable things to be nurtured within oneself and to be extended to others. So, A Song of Ice and Fire and The Legendarium are two of my all-time fancy favorites, right? And the former, whilst not grimdark, nor devoid of hope or positive portrayals of human nature altogether, does feel relentlessly tragic at times. It's a bit heavy-going in places, as all of you A Song of Ice and Fire fans know. The latter, whilst not Manichaean either, lacks a certain amount of moral nuance, though perhaps less so when only considering the Silmarillion. Your mileage will vary there, of course. Kingkiller, for me, sits somewhere between the two, and that felt refreshing as fuck. I think it is realistic in its portrayal of human nature overall, but it never feels cynical. And yeah, I really like that. It was refreshing for me. There's also a quiet, gentle, at any rate just very compassionate representation, it's not exactly the right word for this, but it'll have to suffice for now, of mental illness, mental vulnerability, disability in a way, and yes, difference, like I already alluded to. And that also felt very nice, cozy, comforting. I don't want to speculate about authorial intent, as I've stated many times as well, but I am aware Mr. Rothfuss isn't, sadly for him, unfamiliar with some of these things on a personal level. So perhaps a bit of that bled into his storytelling, for me in a positive way. I mean, I don't know, of course, but look, I copied an entire page of writing about the different doors a person's mind may go through to cope with excruciating mental pain. Kvothe basically cites a book of philosophy about this, and it had me in tears. So there you go. I'm aware there are many criticisms levied at this series, as there are many criticisms levied at every single work of media and art, duh. And I don't think these books are perfect either. There are, yes, a couple of crumbs of cringe involving sexy times and Kvothe thinking bit too highly of his prowess, or riz, as the kids say these days, after a certain experience. But you know what, you could technically chalk that up to unreliable narration too, so it's not too bad either. Tamarant, as a world, is built as somewhat patriarchal by default, at least in some places, without any deeper setup or justification, but that's like, it's fine, honestly. So many stories do it, and it's not egregious or offensive here. And besides, I don't have any real issues with the series' female character work, so it's all good for me. There is a minority of female students at the university, and the discrimination they face is very much acknowledged. So that's actually a plus. And those female characters are shown to be, well, people. So yay! And of course, it needs to be remarked, I guess, sadly, that this tale remains unfinished. Just like A Song of Ice and Fire. Thank you to my friend for now making me sad about this. But then, you know, conversely, I'm the reason she wrote A Song of Ice and Fire, and she loved it, so I guess that's fair. And honestly, at this point, big whelp, I guess. Of course I want an ending. A billion times duh, but I'm not going to or harass an author because of that, because that is unacceptable behavior. This has been a PSA. You're welcome. The point is that I haven't felt like this about a work of fantasy in a long freaking time. I legitimately had a reading withdrawal when I finished The Wise Man's Fear, for freak's sake. I miss those books, and I will 1000% reread them at some point. So I'm rating Kingkiller, for now, with a very, very strong 8 out of 10, but I honestly feel like it has the potential to morph into an even stronger 8.5 out of 10, and so, yes, that means this is, in fact, a new favourite. I also read The Slow Regard of Silent Things, a Kingkiller Chronicles companion novella that centers on the wonderful character of Ori. There is no real plot to speak of here. This is just a very special character vignette full of what I'm going to term gentle luminosity. It is very lyrical, very sensitive, full of compassion and the broken beauty of a lost, damaged, but also very resilient soul. And a very generous soul. This novella almost felt like a piece of music to me, in the sense that music, as an art form, for me, is all about the expression of pure emotion, which is also why I prefer instrumental music, as an FYI. It is my second favourite art form after literature, or perhaps on par with it, but it functions very distinctly from the latter. And yet, having thought about it, yeah, this piece of writing felt a bit like music, because it was, for me, just a written expression of pure being and feeling. Additionally, I related to Ori, yes, but not because I saw myself reflected in her quite, but rather because she reminds me of a younger version of myself, kind of, or the most damaged and vulnerable parts of myself, or a bit of both. So, partial self-reflection for the win, I guess. I just empathized very deeply with her. She is a precious little moonfey being, and I will cut any bitch who dares to harm her. Alright? Alright. After the highs of the Kingkiller Chronicles, I sank back into bitter literary disappointment. Or, well, okay, maybe not actual disappointment, since I didn't expect anything specific out of this next book, but blech, it wasn't good. It being Chouette, written by Claire Oshetsky. You want a base premise? I'll give you a base premise. A cellist named Tiny, referred to as Tiny, becomes pregnant with an owl baby she believes issued from her passionate union with a wild female owl lover, and, well, tries to deal with that, as you would, her heterosexual marriage and her very strange perception of reality, to put it mildly. And if you think that sounds weird, that's because it was. And not my kind of weird, because, little reminder, there's good weird and bad weird in my book. And it's obviously my book. It's all subjective, right? The prose was good enough, it was fine, so, you know what, I'll dispense with that and go straight to the interesting shit, the crux of the matter, the novella's theming. Chouette's main theme is, to put it simply, that of motherhood. And its story works as one giant magically realistic metaphor for the trials and tribulations of motherhood. And being a mother to an unusual child, in this case a literal, or is it, owl baby. It's not like the theming is garbage. It isn't. In fact, there are decent kernels of insight in this novella about the complicated thoughts and emotions tied into the experience of motherhood. And I can acknowledge that despite the fact I've absolutely no interest whatsoever in ever being pregnant or a mother. But there were also several issues with its execution. So the book's theming centers on the experience of motherhood. Sure, but it also tries, and largely fails, to focus in on a couple of secondary thematic strands, such as the strain parenthood places on heterosexual marriages. Okay, sure. The challenge an unusual child presents to parenting. Yes. But also the way difference is judged by society more broadly, and the experience of pre- and or postpartum psychosis? Maybe? I'll come back to that. And it just doesn't work. Because the character work, one thing, isn't really there to prop up a large part of that additional theming, and because the plot, for another, is shackled to the metaphorical or magical realism nature of its premise. With regards to the former, there isn't much character work to speak of, quite frankly, outside of the narrators, and even then it's hard to get a solid grasp of who she is besides a cellist, given the trippy framing of her story. With regards to the latter, it's hard to empathize with Tiny's position, and that of her child, when said child isn't even human in any meaningful sense of the word. At least, that's what you're more than not led to believe as the reader. Some of the child's traits could be interpreted as a metaphorical representation of high support needs autism, sensory processing disorder, etc., which is fine, but the kid also fucking eviscerates small animals, including neighborhood pets, and almost disembowels a pregnant woman, because she's an owl baby. And owls, in nature, wouldn't you know, are apex predators. Right. Given that, it's entirely reasonable to take the dad's side in all of this and call Tiny out on her bullshit for enabling deeply dysfunctional and violent behavior. Not to say mildly sociopathic around the edges. It's certainly not acceptable behavior for a human being, at any rate, though. Honestly, as a bird nerd, I'd argue it also paints a reductive portrait of owls, but that's a separate issue. I guess you can choose to view this novella through the lens of magical realism, the lens of deep psychosis, or perhaps both. Either way, the owl babiness of it all certainly firmly functions as a metaphor, and Tiny can honestly be read as very mentally ill, even if you choose to believe her child literally is, a were-owl, is what I'm gonna go with. This then breaks the quality of the story's theming on motherhood, because it doesn't so much present the experience of motherhood in a broad sense, as it does experience of motherhood, and a particularly challenging one at that. Tiny, to put it nicely, needs medical help. Big time. And her marriage isn't properly fulfilling or even all that supportive. So it's kind of obvious in a way that hers would be such a horrible experience. And hers would be a really warped understanding of unconditional maternal love. Because even my child-free ass knows unquestioningly enabling all of your child's dysfunctional behaviors isn't at all a mature or healthy way to love and nurture them. Duh. I could also add that as a former disabled and neurodivergent child, Chouette and her dog triad behavior, acting as metaphorical stand-ins for those things, felt a smidge unpalatable at times. But also, if I'm perfectly honest, I'm not actually all that fussed about it, so whatever. It all comes down to the fact that, for me, Chouette is over-committed to, and thus severely hampered by, its central metaphorical quality. It's metaphor before everything else, basically. The story sticks way too much to the guns of Tiny's therianthropic daughter. Whether real or hallucinated makes no real difference functionally, and nixes the subtlety or nuance its theming requires in the process. Then, of course, cherry on top of the cake, the plot takes a turn for the wildly trippier and more violent, as I've noticed seems to be a trend with magical realism, towards its end, and I duly rolled my eyes at it. This novella has essentially confirmed the nebulous, in-between genre of magical realism or magical science fiction, metaphorical fiction, whatever you want to call it, just isn't meant for me as a general rule, at any rate. I will thus avoid titles belonging to it entirely going forward, unless it comes highly recommended from a solidly trusted source. And so, yeah, ratings-wise, I gave Chouette a 4.5 out of 10. It was a waste of time for me, though, again, not complete garbage in its attempt at theming, but just no. No with the owl baby. Nah. Onto the recurring cinematic media segment. Last month, I watched 2 superhero and supervillain movies. Man of Steel and The Suicide Squad, the second one. The former serves as an origin story for DC Comics' Superman. Now, as a general rule, I don't have any time, none whatsoever, for superhero comic book shtick unless it's served up as parody or satire. Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy accepted, and I only watched this movie because of a friend. And I thought it was shite. The world building was poorly developed, there were so many plot contrivances, and the pacing was abject garbage. Wow. There's also insta-love nonsense in this bitch, which is like, okay, and well, yeah, there's just nothing for it. I cannot with the superhero stuff, precisely because I cannot take a grown-ass man flying around in a colorful superhero bodysuit and cape. Seriously. Sorry, not sorry. I can't. When Superman whipped out his costume and started flying around, I laughed. I laughed so hard because it looked ridiculous. For some reason, it doesn't bug me nearly as much with The Dark Knight. Perhaps this is because Batman's superhero chops derive from advanced tech, or perhaps it's simply because other aspects of those movies compensate for the superhero goof factor. Who knows? In any case, Man of Steel's rating definitely falls somewhere below 5 out of 10 for me. Oh, it was shit. As to the Suicide Squad, that was solid, absurdist fun. So yeah, I have seen the first one, and whilst I've forgotten most of it, pretty sure I prefer this one. Precisely because it's all kind of silly by design, if you get what I mean. I don't think I was meant to take this seriously, and I very much did not. Yet, I enjoyed the movie's characters, character dynamics, and the many laughs it elicited from me. You might say it's a bit unhinged. It has a shark dude, cool. A dude who kills people with polka dots, of all things. Harley Quinn, whose aspiration to do better when it comes to spotting red flags and potential romantic partners, I can relate to. You go, girl. A rat catcher and her cute little rat friends. I like them. And, a kaiju starfish from outer space. A wild, but effective combination, to be sure. And yeah, it just worked for me as, a solid bit of entertainment. I don't generally go specifically for the popcorn factor, though I do so more with movies than books, but I liked it here well enough, so I'd rate this one with a soft 7 out of 10. Why not? Then back in anime land, I watched Cowboy Bebop, another classic of the medium, as I understand it, and it was fine. I honestly don't have that much to say about it because it didn't leave that strong of an impression. To be completely honest here, that's also because I didn't always pay super close attention to what I was watching. But then again, that's also because nothing about Cowboy Bebop's storyline, world, or characters ever really gripped me. It's mostly an episodic show, so kind of like a police procedural or hospital drama. And whilst I certainly enjoyed a bit of CSI or Criminal Minds, a bit too much of that actually back in the day, this formula didn't really work for me here because there just wasn't much substance I could engage with overall. On the style front, I guess this anime feels neat enough. Its score and aesthetics blend jazz, noir, and western notes in a future space age or space opera adjacent setting, and that's that. There's a bit of thematic through-lining concerned with letting go of the past as well, and centered on a skeleton of an overarching story, sure, but not much is ultimately made of it that I could dig into at any rate. The characters were whatever. Entirely forgettable. In fact, one of them feels pretty pointless and just fucks off at one point because I don't know why. There was also a smidge of proverbial anime fan service that had my eyes duly rolling but it wasn't as bad as it was at NGE. At least it didn't involve any minors. So yay! Speaking of which, both animes kind of sit at the same level for me rating-wise, but for different reasons. Cowboy Bebop felt meh throughout, but inoffensively so. NGE made me rage hard, but it also did something more interesting for me with its aesthetics and effective with its theming on self-loathing specifically. The former basically gets its rating through mediocre constancy, whilst the latter gets a similar rating through the averaging of its peaks and troughs. That's my logic. That being said, I'll give Cowboy Bebop this. It has a funny sounding name. Bebop. Finally, I watched the first 3 original, I believe, Gundam movies, titled, on Netflix at any rate, Mobile Suit Gundam 1, 2, and 3. Because, once again, I have, friends who enjoy anime, and who are also, for some of them, giant death robot enthusiasts. Mobile Suit Gundam takes place in the future when a portion of humanity has emigrated to O'Neill cylinder colonies. Yes, I googled that just for this review. You're welcome. I'm pretty sure still in the solar system. So it's like the thing you have in Rendezvous with Rama, basically. You have Dyson spheres and you have O'Neill cylinders. Today I learned. Cool. By the year 0073 of some new futuristic calendar, a subset of those humans have seceded from humanity's main governing body, called the Earth Federation, to create the independent Principality of Zion. Not Zion, Zion, but and war breaks out between the two. And in this future, wouldn't you know, mechs, of course, have become weapons of war. And so Mobile Suit Gundam story opens up with Amuro, its main male protagonist, and a citizen of cylinder colony number I can't remember, narrowly escaping an attack by the Principality of Zion with a bunch of friends, most of them teens. They wind up as refugees on a fancy warship called White Base that happened to be there to pick up Gundams and gun tanks, gun cannons, basically new and shiny mech models, which is also why the colony was attacked in the first place. And to make a long intro short, Amuro happens to be a naturally gifted mech pilot, and stuff happens with that. And this was also fine. It was kinda neat to watch an fairly older anime, I think it released in the 1970s, though don't quote me on that, and appreciate the evolution of the medium's stylistic standards, if you will. It was kind of fun to watch the lot of it in Japanese because there is no dub for this, and hear names such as gun cannon, which seem pretty clearly derived from English, vigorously thrown out in, well, Japanese. Has that extra spice to it. And Gundam kind of works as a decently well-executed wartime narrative, I guess, since I believe it's pretty obviously meant to take its inspiration from World War II. The Gundam mech wielded a glorified lightsaber at times, which had somewhat of a cool factor. Yay! People who'd never set foot on Earth were shown to freak out in a lightning storm because they'd never been exposed to natural weather before. And okay, yes, that's a very random little detail, I know, but it's one I nonetheless appreciated the logical realism of. Now, the mechs are here piloted by teenagers, yes, but this is because the peeps of White Base are literally in a situation of force majeure, and the captain or commander, what have you, doesn't find this ideal in the slightest. He's not happy about this, so point to Gundam for that over NGE. Fight me. There wasn't too much cringe, nor I don't think there was any real fan service. There's a bit of goof with toddler characters. They were grating at times. It was alright overall. The war narrative itself was decent, though I'm not particularly interested in war stories. And that was actually one of my main issues with the Poppy War, outside of Rin. It's a war narrative. Actually, I did say in my review I thought that was well done as far as I could tell. It's just not the kind of story I'm generally interested in. So yeah, the war narrative aspect of Gundam was fine. Well done, I guess. But then, for me, the world building, the bits of world building that had been established, and the character work such as it had been up until that point, really crashed hard in the second half of the Gundam movie trilogy, because it started delving into psionic shit. with little build-up or support. Cause so yeah, there's this subplot with like, next stage of evolution, new humans with psionic abilities. And so Amuro is probably one of them, and that's why he's such a brilliant mech pilot, because he can mentally sync with it, blah 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 blah. But that stuff devolves into very trippy scenes. I was like, what are you doing right now? And entirely unknown emotional development. So I was like, what is this? And that includes some insta-love BS. So then entirely question of personal taste, obviously, but there were very questionable music choices that felt deeply tonally dissonant to me. Wow, that music, I was like, whoa, what is that? And the simple fact is, at the end of the day, at the start of the day, and in the middle of the day, I just don't give a shit about giant robots. I just don't. I watched all 3 movies on like 2 times speed, I think, or 1.5, whatever the maximum speed is on Netflix, because the mech battles were just so freaking boring. And I struggled hard to stay focused. And I kind of had to here because, you know, subtitles. I had to pay attention and read the screen, otherwise I wouldn't have understood anything the characters were saying. I only put myself through this kind of stuff because the beauty of friendship, that's what I'm gonna go with. So yeah, this was a soft 5.5 out of 10. Sure, let's go with that, but no more mechs, no more giant death robots, unless you have to do something very, very different with it, because like, no, I don't like giant death robots. I don't like superheroes. Bye. And that concludes my reading and viewing wrap-up for the month of September. In October, I have a few, well, Spooktober appropriate reads lined up, including Uzumaki by Junji Ito, and then a couple of books with the word witchcraft in the title, because yes. And then sci-fi that gets creepy and nihilistic. I'm saying this because I've already started it and it's so not working for me, but I suck at DNFing, so yay. Blindside by Peter Watts. Oh wow, will I have an unpopular opinion about that one by the time I'm through with it, undoubtedly. You have that to look forward to, I guess. But that will be all for now. I hope you had a good reading and everything else month of September, and I hope your reading and everything else month of October will go smoothly. I wish you all a lovely day, evening, whichever time of day you prefer. Do take good care of yourselves. Thank you for the continued support, and I shall see you all reasonably soon in another video. But until then, bye-bye.